Welcome back to another, podcast that we are putting on. My name is Jason Wood, and along with Lee Maddox and Michael Maddox, we are partners in a nationwide brokerage company. We provide brokerage services to all types of healthcare. Today, though, we are going to be talking about dental practices and sellers and some of the most important issues that you will be dealing with as a seller. What we're going to try to do is we're going to try to take you from pretty much the start to the end process on when you are contemplating selling your practice. So without further ado, let me introduce you. I have Lee Maddox. Lee, tell us a little bit about yourself for those newly tuning in.
Yeah, so my name is Lee Maddox, and I'm a dentist, a board-certified endodontist, and I'm a lawyer and a broker, and I've been involved in the healthcare transaction business since 2001.
Michael?
I'm Michael Maddox. I'm a dental broker looking to expand into the healthcare space, and I kind of manage the aspects of dental brokerage from A to Z, helping sellers sell their practice and buyers get the information they need to make a decision.
Well, awesome. I appreciate that. So one of the things that I've been dealing with a lot, and I know you guys have as well, I get asked a lot as to, well, when should I sell my practice? And, obviously the immediate response is we go to, okay, age. But for at least when I hear that, I think more of not just age, but context from an economic standpoint, from a lifestyle standpoint. So what would you say, Lee, to some of the people listening in as to when should I sell my practice?
Yeah, it's a good question. So you're right. People sell for economic reasons. People sell for lifestyle reasons. There could be a combination of the two. But yeah, I get asked this question 4 or 5 times a week, being a healthcare transactional attorney. People will call me up and saying, I'm getting tired. I don't want to deal with staff issues anymore. A lot of doctors call me up and say, I don't want to look at another upper second molar, on Monday morning and have to prep it. So, the question is, where do we start? And so I normally ask 2 very fundamental questions. They're very straightforward. One is, are you financially ready? The second is, are you mentally ready? And they're both important. The financial question is very basic math. We take revenue in minus your home expenses, and whatever is on the other side of the equal sign will dictate whether or not you can afford to sell your practice. So if you're rich, if you have a lot of money, it's a very simple answer. It doesn't matter if I continue to own my practice. I have enough money to pay my monthly bills, and I can sell my practice and do whatever I want. But for a lot of people, they actually have to do the calculation. So if you were to imagine to discontinue receiving any more revenue from your practice, and if you can imagine that your home expenses are going to go up by 25 to 30% because you are not having the practice to pay for the Costco, for the car, for travel, for cell phones, for computers. So your home expenses are going to go up. So if you have a $10,000 a month home expense, it might be $12,000, $13,000, $14,000 after you sell the practice. So we really have to take a look at your financials and find out, where do you sit at this point in time? And what's the future look like? So right now, how much money do you have in the bank? And in the future, what's coming in? Do you have inheritance, Social Security? Do you have income from properties, any kind of investment income? Because the rule of thumb, and I'm not a financial analyst, but the rule of thumb out there is that you can only take 4% out of your locked up savings accounts without eating into the principal. So if you got $5 million, you can take out $200,000 taxable. If you have $1 million, you can take out $40,000 a year taxable. So we have to look at what you actually have saved and then actually look in the future as to where's the future revenue going to come in. So if you have plenty of money coming in after you sell the practice, enough to cover your home expenses, and on the right side of the equal sign, it's a positive number, and it's going to allow you to do the things that you want to do in life, then you can sell your practice. So when I say that, what we don't want you to do is sell yourself into poverty. We don't want you to sell and then realize 2 or 3 years later, I got to go get another job, because you're going to, depending on your state, you're going to have a covenant not to compete issue that's going to interfere with that. So really at this point, I will send my clients back to have a chat with their significant others, their CPA, and any financial advisors to really get a feel for where they are financially. And if they come back to me and say they have enough money, then we can do any kind of transition they want. We can bring in an associate, we can do an associate to partnership, we can do a straight sale. The second issue is if they're actually going to really walk away from it, they need to have a plan. So are they mentally ready? They could be mentally ready in the sense that they don't want to deal with staff issues. They could be mentally ready that they don't really want to work 4 days a week anymore. But do they have a plan? Are they going to sit at home and do nothing? I mean, dentists are artists and scientists, and if they sit at home and do nothing and they don't keep their hands busy and their mind busy, they're going to be pretty miserable people. So, what's the plan after you sell? Are you going to go on a lot of vacations? Do you have grandkids? Are you going to do wood shop? Are you going to make thinning and metal? You're going to be in boating, hiking, gun shooting, whatever it is, you have to have a plan. And if you don't have a plan, the rule of thumb is kind of 5 years from selling to the coffin. So those are the first two questions I want to know. Are they financially ready and mentally ready? So that's the starting part of the conversation.
So do you always lead with 5 years into the coffin? Is that a selling point when you're brokering?
Yeah, I mean, I really want to make sure that my clients understand I care about them, and I want them to have an exit strategy that they'll be successful with. And I get really concerned when people have no plan. And I think what happens is everybody has a list of things that they need to get done, but they don't realize that when they're not working, they can get through that list really quickly.
Right.
So they might have 30 things on the list, and then 3 months later, the list is done, and suddenly they're waking up in the morning and not knowing what to do with themselves, and that can be a problem.
I think that's huge because I mean, like you, I'm an attorney and I deal with brokers all over the United States, and I rarely see that those questions are being asked by brokers. And so I love that we ask that among a bunch of other questions, but it's just something that is overlooked by perceived advisors who are so dependent on convincing the seller to sell rather than focusing on the long-term well-being of the seller. And I know for me in the last 10 years, especially since COVID, that we've seen a lot of 40-somethings wanting to sell because they're tired of staff issues. They're tired of reimbursement issues. They're seeing these issues develop in their practice, and then they are listening to people who are, I call them fearmongers because I can't come up with a worse term, but who are trying to convince these people to sell. But then, like you rightly point out, what happens after? If you're going to be 48 years old, 52 years old, you're in the prime, and that's what most people don't know is the late 40s, early 50s are the prime earning years of most individuals in society. And you are choosing, if you sell in your 40s, to forego that. And so talking about all those issues, talking about all of those different levels of selling the practice and what that looks like economically, what that looks like lifestyle decisions. It's great that you want to coach your kids' baseball team or soccer team, but do you really need to sell your practice to do that? Are there other ways that you can create the vision that you want for your life without letting go of your moneymaker? And I love that we talk about all those things because I feel like most people in this industry don't, because they're so dependent on that seller having to sell in order for them to make a paycheck.
Well, Jason, you know this because you see problems like I see problems. And if a doctor sells his practice and he has no other outside income source, they can't borrow money to buy a condo. So, maybe they make a decision that they want to sell, their house that their wife and or the two parties nested in for 40 years that the kids haven't come back to. So they sell their house, they have a chunk of money, and then they want to go out and buy a condo, and they find out they have to put that chunk of money to buy the condo. They can't get a loan.
Right.
So it's really significant to understand that. And then secondly, I like to say my kids find new ways for me to spend my money. So I paid for 4 kids to go to colleges. We got 3 kids with masters. I've helped buy homes. I'm funding 529 plans now. We have baby showers. We have wedding showers. We pay for weddings. So, all those things need to be looked at. So when you talk to a financial planner, they're always going to ask you, well, how much do you think you're going to spend a year for vacations? How much do you think you need to put away for savings? How much do you think you're going to need to have for repairs in your house? And all of that matters because if you sell your practice for $1 million and you pay about a third in taxes, depending on the state that you're in,
Right.
and you pay your broker and you pay your accountant and lawyer, and let's just say that we just rough it out and say you end up with $650,000. At $650,000, you can only pull 4% out a year. What's that, like 25 grand a year taxable?
Right.
And you want to take a $20,000 a year vacation, then and you want to do some home improvements, you're going to spend 100 grand. You got to take the money out of savings. So that $600,000 in savings becomes $500,000. And so for some of our clients, if they don't think it through, within 4 or 5 years, they've spent all the money that they got out of the practice sale, and they may still have a mortgage,
Right.
and they may still have some liabilities. So I don't think there should be a rush, for the doctors to sell. What I like to tell people is, if you don't sell, you're going to make 1.5 to 2 times your net earnings when you sell. So if you wait 2 years, you're going to make 100% of what you would have sold it for. So if you wait 4 years, you're going to make 200%. So I'm here when you're ready, but don't rush and sell and put yourself in an impoverished situation where you can't live the lifestyle that you're used to.
So what would you say to someone who is saying, instead of selling, I'm just gonna kind of coast for a few years. I'm gonna take more vacations. I'm going to maybe pull back on the throttle a little bit and not work as hard. Is that a good idea?
It can be for some, and for some it's the wrong answer. There are certainly some of my friends that are financially set, and they don't need to sell the practice to make the money to make their retirement account bigger. So for some people that don't want to have an associate, don't want to have that stress of worrying about an associate, or they don't want to sell because they really like coming to work, that's their hobby, then it can make sense. Just you can have a glide path and say, I'm going to retire in 5 years, and you work for 5 years and you shut the doors, and you'll have made more money than if you sold your practice. It seems silly to not have that revenue come out of your practice, but for some people, a very small minority of people, that is a solution. But otherwise, what I typically tell people is act as if you haven't sold your practice, keep investing in the practice. Investing in the practice meaning keep the place looking nice, bring in new technologies. It's good for you, it's good for the staff, it's good for the patients, and your revenue will trickle up. If you put nothing into it, you get nothing out of it. Just like religion or anything else, if you don't put anything into it, you get nothing out of it.
Mm-hmm.
So, put some time in it, put some effort into it, and keep making your practice look nice, keep the technology up, keep growing revenue, but do it at a pace that you're comfortable with. You don't have to oversell or overdiagnose or overtreat. So, but I would say if you're going to sell your practice, the easiest way to make your practice worth more is to quit running expenses through your practice. So if you 5 years before, or at least 3 years before you're going to sell your practice, stop paying for the Starbucks and the Zumbas and the cell phones and the car expenses. It'll make the net income of your practice look a lot better. And with multiple of earnings calculations, you're gonna have a practice that's worth a lot more. I mean, just on a simple example, if you take $40,000 that you are writing off through your business on multiple miscellaneous things, Starbucks, computers, cell phones, that $40,000, if you're in the 50% tax bracket, is going to save you $20,000.
Mm-hmm.
But that $40,000 at 2 times revenue is $80,000. At 2.5 times revenue is $100,000. So why are we saving $20,000 when we make $100,000 when we sell? So 2, 3, 4 years before, certainly 3 years, because most banks, most brokers, most CPAs are going to look at the last 3 years. Certainly, one of the things you'd want to do 3 years before is stop running expenses through your office. There are some other things that you should consider 3 years before too, like having the spouse not work in the office and bringing somebody else in and retraining them. because there can be some animosity when you sell your practice if the spouse has to stay back and work 6 or 8 months when you're out on the golf course every day. So that's just, I could go on that, but I'll stop for now.
Zumba. I didn't realize people still did Zumba. So
it's a big thing.
It's a big thing. Yeah.
Yeah.
Big thing in Orange County. Okay. So one of the things that I tell my clients is if you're going to coast, be very careful of falling. I say falling below 600 grand. 600 grand being at least not, and please understand it's not biblical, but a teetering point where it becomes very hard to sell your practice because the buyers are coming out of school with so much more debt that they can't afford to buy smaller practices. So I tell my sellers that you can coast, but when you start getting close to 600 grand, that can become a problem for you long term. So, but Michael, to the younger doctors, what are you seeing in terms of them coming out? I guess in terms of them being able to qualify for loans, are you seeing that they're trying to buy smaller practices because they're fearful of more debt, but then they're not able to qualify because of the debt that they already have?
You know what? what I'm seeing lately is that buyers want a certain amount of collections, and a lot of it's between 600 and 800,000. Maybe because they feel that will help them pay off their loan faster, and then they want a certain amount of ops because they have this idea in their head that that's what they need. So a lot of times buyers don't want anything under 5 ops, very rarely 3, and I'm seeing they're avoiding the $300,000 to $400,000 practices, even 5.
Yeah, and the math plays that out, right?
Right.
If you have a practice doing 600,000, your minimum threshold, at 70% overhead on the higher side, that's $420,000 of operating expense. Leaves you $180,000 of income against mortgage costs, which will be about $70,000 or $80,000.
Right.
So you're living on $100,000 and $110,000, and that's not real $110,000. That's not money in the pocket. That's when you're paying car expenses and cell phones and all those things, out of that. But you might be taking a check of $5,000, $6,000, $7,000 a month. So your living income is $6,000, $7,000 a month. That is going to be taxed at some point. So what we really find is, and Michael and I experience this all the time, if we have a practice doing $500,000 or $300,000, if associate's going to buy it, they have to have at least one more job,
Right.
maybe 2. But they're working 6 days a week, and then they're trying to grow a practice that they just bought, and they're working there 2 days a week. So they're not putting all their energy into the practice. They're not available for emergencies, and they're going out to other offices, and then they're tired when they work in their practices. Right. So the practices that are doing $300,000 and $400,000, the doctors that are selling them are living on it because they don't have a mortgage.
Right.
But when you put a mortgage on it, it makes it not doable.
I typically say that those are practices for your second location. You've already got a thriving practice. Then you can make a calculated risky move if you want to buy a second practice that's only doing $300,000 or $400,000, and you see that there's that the doctors let it go or whatever. But for you guys listening to this who are sellers, you need to understand that that's an exceptionally hard practice to sell, because what you've done is you've eliminated a vast majority of potential buyers. And you end up with either having it sit there for a long period of time, or even possibly worse, having to do what's called a chart sale. And chart sales are much cheaper than the acquisition of a full practice. So what would you say for the specialists out there in terms of maybe changes in the marketplace for specialists as it relates to what buyers are looking at, and maybe what some potential specialist seller issues are?
Well, the specialty market it's hard to talk about because it's so siloed, right? But the historical referral patterns are completely broken up.
Right.
So we have multiple types of practice models now that are going on in this country. We have the DSO model, which is multi-specialty based. We have group practices, which are multi-specialty based. And we have dental tourism, where people are going out of the country to get their work done. We have, stuff going on in hospitals and schools. So there's different practice models. And so the traditional referral base where a orthodontist or a pedodontist or an endodontist is going to have 100 referrals where 40 of them are sending them 30 or 40 patients a year. There's some practices out there, but there's a lot of them that are not having that same referral pattern anymore. And so the question always is, how do you market that? And I don't really know the answer. My first thing is, if you're not dating your girlfriend, somebody probably else is dating your girlfriend. So if you got a referral that's referring you 100 patients a year, and you're just sending them a box of See's candy at the end of the year, there's probably some young person coming in town who's taking them to a Laker game or to a hockey game or inviting them to go skiing or doing something, and they may not succumb to the first couple of invites, but eventually it might feel good to them to be important. So I would say from a specialty-based position, you have to stay actively engaged. And I hear a lot from my friends that are specialists that people won't go to lunch and dinner anymore. And that's fine. Find another way. Study groups, lunch and learns, travel trips, whatever it is you can do to stay close to your referrals. And the other issue, of course, for specialty is that you're one sale away from losing your best referral. So somebody who's referring you 100 patients sells to a young person, and that young person starts doing those things, and suddenly you've lost a big set of referrals. So that's just when we're talking about coasting, right? If you coast in the specialty world, it's going to be practice suicide at some point. If you're relying 100% on internal referrals, that will work for a while, but unless you have a fantastic internal referral model practice, your practice will slow down. So it's good to have some outside referrals. As far as what are the hurdles that they're finding, what they're finding is a lot of young people are either dog in the boxes where they're working at different offices on per diem basis, or they're working for DSOs, and they're making a lot more money than they're going to make in a private practice setting. And that makes it difficult if you have a one-off practice and you're asking to bring an associate in. Let's say an oral surgeon, you say, I'm going to pay you $250,000 a year. Well, they might make $800,000 working for a corporate office. Mm-hmm. I could put them in one of my offices where somebody has a practice where they'll pay them $500,000, $600,000, $700,000 a year. So, if you're trying to hire an associate and you don't have a high volume practice, then you are going to be limited on who you can afford to bring in. And so that can have an impact on the associate. And then as far as the sale model, I'd say for specialists, things have gotten better, right? Because we have a DSO opportunity now that we didn't have when you and I were doing this 10, 15 years ago. Right. There were no DSOs there was Orthodontic Center of America's way back before they blew up. 1980s. And there was nobody for perio, there was nobody for endo, no pros. And now we're seeing a lot more DSO opportunities. So the DSOs are allowing the specialists to sell. And I'm seeing certain specialty groups like and oral surgery really, really selling a lot into the DSO space. And so that limits the associate opportunity other than to the DSO market. And but it also does make prices go up for the doctors.
So let's talk about DSOs as potential buyers for sellers. So I'm pretty well known for being, or at least being perceived to be, anti-DSO, and I think I'm probably perceived that way because I typically am very conservative as it relates to these lofty valuations that DSOs are claiming that they are going to receive on recaps. For those watching, recaps are a recapitalization event, which is the DSO is selling to a bigger company and they're receiving pretty much a windfall associated with the valuation, which then flows down to the doctors eventually. So, but I tend to believe and have stated on many different shows that too many people are selling to DSOs either too early in their career, or they're selling to DSOs when it doesn't make economic sense to sell because their practice isn't big enough, or they are fully reliant on that DSO going through the recap. And one of the dirty little secrets in this industry is the vast majority of DSOs have never gone through a recap. And I think that, unfortunately, most of these doctors don't realize it. And then I would say the fourth thing is they don't realize that they're being played by everybody around them. So one of the worst things that I've seen in the DSO space is sellers are selling to a particular DSO because their buddy sold to that DSO, but they don't realize that their buddy is getting paid 100, 200, maybe even 300 grand for that, for their friend to come and be a part of the DSO, because there's a lot of undisclosed, referral fees and all these other things. So I guess, so it's a kind of a loaded question, but when people are coming and talking to you about a possible sale to a DSO, what are some of the metrics that you talk about when you're having these conversations?
Yeah, so back to the same thing. Are you financially ready and are you mentally ready? And I can't get past the financial question, right? So if a DSO comes in and they want to do a joint venture model, then what they're going to do is they're going to buy 60% of your assets, and then you're going to retain 40% in something. And we'll just say that for now. I mean, some DSOs will make you think you're retaining 40% in your practice, but that's not really what's happening in some of them. But a 60-40 model means you're getting paid 60% of whatever dollar value they put to your practice. And so if my clients have plenty of money and they don't care what they get, and the 60% piece is more than they're going to get from a private buyer, and all the other 40% is blue sky, it could make sense. And if they don't need to live on the income, it can make sense. If the doctor is young, it does not have a pile of cash, maybe let's say we have a doctor who's 50 years old and he has $1 million in the bank account, which is hard for a dentist to get $1 million in the bank account by 50. Let's say he's got a mortgage he owes $500,000 on, and let's say he sells to a DSO for $3 million. Let's say $5 million, doesn't matter, $5 million, and we do a 60-40 split. So the doctor gets paid $3 million. $3 million taxable turns into $2 million. The broker fee on the $3 million could be $300,000. So we went to 2.7. We even go to 2.5 after expenses and broker fees. So you got $2.5 million. You can draw out 4% a year. So that's $100,000 a year taxable. The 50-year-old doctor who's got $1 million in the bank account that still has a $500,000 mortgage, that has no investment income, is not capable of having Social Security come in, not on Medicare, has to be able to live the way they lived before they sold their practice. If they're selling their practice for $5 million, they're probably making $1 million a year. That $1 million a year, they're running it through the corporation. So they're washing some money through. Maybe they're paying tax on $300,000, maybe $400,000. So their taxable event is low. But now they work back for the associate. They got $2.4 million sitting in the bank account, and they're getting paid as an associate. And now that if they get paid $300,000 a year as an associate, a W-2, their first two paychecks or their first 3 or 4 months paychecks, they're going to make like $7,000 or $8,000 after taxes. So somebody who's been used to living on $15,000, $20,000, $25,000, $30,000 a month is now living on $8,000 to $10,000 a month. So now they're $20,000 in the hole 3 or 4 months in a row, and that $2.5 million is slowly chipping away.
Right.
And they're 50 years old. They got weddings. They have college. They have all these other expenses coming in front of them, and so you really have to look at that. Now, some people will do it because they say the covenants and the work requirements and the DSOs are only 5 years. And so if 5 years they run out of money, they'll go back and do it again. But I don't think people realize how hard it is to do it again.
Right.
I mean, you have an amazing practice because you were committed to work harder than anybody around you, work 24/7. You had second and third and fourth and fifth gear, and you lived and breathed the practice 7 days a week. And you can do that when you're 30 and 35 and maybe 40. You start getting 50, 55, 60. You get my age, it's hard to find even the second gear. So it's hard to go out and reproduce that. So some doctors say, well, then I'll go buy it again. Okay, well then to go buy it again, now you're back in debt another $2 million. So the economics of the deals don't always work for the DSOs. And I'm like you, I will spend a lot of time communicating the pros and cons of a DSO. I'm not anti-DSO. My job is to just take care of my client. And I want to make sure they can financially afford to do it. And then I want to make sure they mentally understand what they're getting used to. And my experience is the dentist working in his office is this little fiefdom. And in my particular world, when I was practicing, my staff got my breakfast, my lunch, my dinner. They took the clothes to the cleaners. They got my car washed for me. They babysat my kids in town and on vacations. It was my little universe. It was my little world. And it was a wonderful place. And I may not have been as nice as person. I tried to. But, you know, when I left that world and went into corporate space, I realized that that's a fiction, you know, as far as the business world goes. So if you sell your business and then you now work for a larger company, everything is different. And the things that you worried about are not the same things they're worried about. And when they use the term spreadsheet, they mean it. Like they really want everything down to the cents, and they're going to calculate everything. They're looking at profitability, everything's a margin, and then but that's not the way you ran your practice. You know, when you have a very successful dental practice and you're making $1 million a year, it's very free flowing. You're worried about it, but you're making so much money. So it's very difficult, I think, to transition from being in that situation and moving over. And let me say, I have a little experience with this because I sold my first brokerage business to Henry Schein. So the corporatization of the dental practice is no different than the corporatization of the broker practice or accounting or law, where we're seeing large corporations backed by private equity money coming in and buying you. And I got bought out by Henry Schein. And in my meeting in Henry Schein, they sat at my dinner table with my wife and said, "We're going to save your husband's life.
Oh, geez.
He's going to work so much less. It's going to be so much easier. He's going to be so glad he did this." And in the fifth year that I quit after working with them, and there, I have no complaints. It was a wonderful experience. I learned a ton. But I was traveling to Seattle. I was going to Arizona. I was going to Hawaii. I was gone all the time. I was worried about the spreadsheets. I was working like a dog. There was nothing easy about it. But it was a different experience from living my little fiefdom, because I went from my dental office fiefdom to my law office fiefdom, to my brokerage business fiefdom, and then suddenly I'm working for the large corporation, and they're calling me up saying, "Well, what's going on with the overhead? You know, why is this person not producing? Why are the expenses? You know?" And so that's a different experience. And so when you're in your private practice and you're just worried about if your schedule's filled, and they're worried about if you're hitting your margins, it can be a different experience. And I think the other issue, of course, is that you have people that maybe aren't doctors questioning you. So, you know, have area supervisors that come in and say, "Why did you give that antibiotic?" Or "Why are you doing that treatment?" Now, they're not supposed to do that, and the laws in California don't allow them to do that. But I have had clients that have discontinued working at DSOs because people are coming in and questioning their treatment planning and their, and their procedures and their policies. And so at some point they get frustrated and say, "I don't want to do it." And some people love it. So I don't know.
Yeah. So so when I guess I'm similar in my conversations with clients. I have these numbers that I throw out, and they're not, they can move based upon the parameters of the deal. But what I typically say is if your practice isn't collecting at least 2.5 million, then I don't really see how the economics make sense. Selling to a DSO with the risk that you are taking on of not being able to sell the remaining part of the practice if they're in a JV model, or being able to sell that equity in a parent company model where you're holding equity, because I don't think a lot of dentists understand that's not a marketable security. There is nobody out there that will say, "Hey, I'll buy this for you."
Yeah, I think you raise a good point,
Yeah.
and I don't want you to move past it without hitting it. A 60-40 split with some companies, you can get rid of 25% of the 40 you retain, but the other 15% they won't buy from you.
Correct.
And so if they're buying you at 6-7 times EBITDA on the 60%, the 40%, we don't know what it's going to be because it's going to be a recap. It could be more than 6 or 7%. It could be less. But the 15% piece is going to be sold at private practice levels.
Yep. And that's what a lot of people don't understand. There's some pretty well known DSOs out there, and they put forward this valuation of, let's say it's a $5 million deal, but the reality is 15% you're never going to either get, or the likelihood of you being able to sell that for what they're claiming you can sell it at is very low. And people just brush right through that. And so that's one of the things that I talk about with people is, it's all, everyone likes to go right to the purchase price, the valuation. Well, I'm making $5 million, but are you really making $5 million? And then remember, you have to stay working for 3 or 5 years. Well, they're telling me I don't have to, but the documents are saying something else.
Yeah.
So, so you working 3 to 5 years, you're working, as you said, you're working at a W-2. So now all of a sudden your effective tax rate was probably around 23, 25%, depending upon how aggressive you are with your CPA. And now all of a sudden you're paying almost 50% taxes in most jurisdictions. It's a wake-up call, but more importantly, for me, it's an issue of if you are trying to sell, and I have so many people contact me who are at like 1.2, 1.4, 1.5 million, and I've got this great offer from a DSO. But if you analyze it, they already have to work 3 to 5 more years anyway. So why not just own for 3 or 5 more years, invest your profits into something, and depending upon your age and depending upon your finances and your economics, maybe you're aggressive, maybe you're conservative, but you invest that profit, live below your means, invest that profit. I would say 100%, but I'll say 99% of the time, you're going to be ahead of what you would have done if you would have sold to a DSO when you're at the $1.2, $1.4 million level. And so for me, analyzing the tax implications, analyzing the investment returns, analyzing, the freedom that you have, like you were talking about, your fiefdom. And all of these things have to be analyzed. And when I tell people, I'm like, you do understand there's like 17 levels of things that we need to be thinking about. The purchase price might be at level 10, but everyone puts it at level 1, and usually there's no other level. It's just that's the purchase price, and that's what I'm getting. And again, I go back to there are so many people that are dependent upon this doctor selling that oftentimes they're jumping before they're even asking the question, should I jump at all?
Yeah, I mean, I think that you and I probably have a better understanding of DSOs than most of our sellers do, and we can try really hard to educate them, but it's very complicated.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that happens is that it feels good to be invited to the club.
Yes.
Right? So if they take a doctor who's doing really well and he feels very good about himself in the practice, and then they say, you can come to the club, it feels really good. He can tell his friends, yeah, I'm getting $5 million, and it feels really good. The $5 million I used was super inflated. Take that and dilute it down to get to your 1.5 million. You see there's almost no money there. But if you were to take $5 million and it was a 60-40 split, so it was $3 million in cash, I overinflated the numbers. Probably in that there would be about $600,000 of equity. So $600,000 would go into equity. And let's not talk dental for a minute. Let's just move into the medical space. So I did a transaction on the medical side with a specialty group that had more than 25 practices in California. And they were going to give my client, let's just say, $1 million of equity. So the question was, how are we doing the transfer of my goodwill to your unit value and your LLC on the equity side?
Right.
How do I know that my $2 of goodwill is worth $1 of your 1 unit dollar? I mean, how do we know that number is right? Or should I be getting, should I be getting $1 for dollar on it, or 3 for 1, or 1 for 3? We don't know. And when you go to these large companies and say, what have you done to analyze your financials And a lot of them will say, we do internal appraisals.
Internal, right.
And you say, well, okay, let us see it. Well, they don't want you to see it. They've done no external fairness studies.
Have you ever come across a DSO that has had an external? I have not.
No, I don't think so.
Yeah.
And I've never had a DSO or MSO on the medical side that's willing to tell me that it's okay.
Right.
Or let me restate that. They never have shared with me their financials, and they've never, they've never had a fairness study that I'm aware of that they shared with us. So we really don't know what the true per unit value is in the LLC, and that's important. We're doing a 741 exchange for a tax-free reason, so we're supposed to taking goodwill changing for units. So this will be supposed to be worth the same. Otherwise, it could be a taxable event either way. But we don't have any view of that. And then later we'll do a 43B to lock in long-term capital gains. We need to know that these things work.
83B or
83B. Thank you. Yeah, I was going to go 7
You're
first.
good.
Think 83B. So and so we need that. So we want to lock in capital gains later. But if our initial assumption is wrong, that they weren't worth they were what they were worth, or we weren't what we were worth,
right,
then it can fall apart completely. And that's coming back to what you're saying is, what did you get at the end of the day? And if you're overpaying for the equity, and then the equity underperforms, it's a double hit.
Mm-hmm.
So.
And that's by the way an extremely important point that I don't want you viewers to miss. What we're saying is, you're being told that your share unit value is worth $10. But then we say, okay, can you please show us proof of the $10 per unit? And their response is going to be, well, it's an internal. So what that means is that people within their organization have looked at the numbers, have looked at their debt, have looked at their assets, have looked at their liabilities, their revenues, and come to the conclusion that it's worth $10. But there's no independent study. There's no, as Lee said, there's no fairness study. There's no analysis as to whether or not that $10 is a legitimate $10. And that's something that very few people understand or even know. There is a large DSO right now that is on the verge of bankruptcy. They have over 200 locations. They had been claiming that their per unit value was more than $17. Well, now they finally did an independent analysis and it was worth less than $2. So think about that. You think that you have a share price that's worth $17. You have traded your goodwill, as Lee was saying earlier, based upon a $17 a share value, and now it's worth $2. Did you sell to the right company? And the problem is, and this is why it's so important to not rush through these things and to make sure you're talking with the right people, is because this analysis is not done most of the time. And quite frankly, it's done very rarely. And it's kind of the Wild West. And if you aren't protecting yourself, if you aren't setting yourself up with people who are willing to basically say, screw this deal, my client is more important than the commission at the end, you could end up with stock that's worth $2 when you think it's worth $17. So it's a very, very complicated procedure to sell to a DSO. And there's metrics that need to be hit. And if you're not hitting those metrics, then you're actually losing money over the 3 to 5 years. So that's kind of the stuff that we're talking about. We want you to understand and know before you start signing listing agreements, before you start signing letter of intents with DSOs. So,
yeah, I mean, let's just be clear. We work in the DSO space.
Right.
So I'll have this conversation with people, and there'll be a percentage of my clients that will sell to DSOs. And my job is to try to protect them in the legal document. I'll have a percentage of clients that are in the broker space that will sell to DSOs. We will have the same conversation. If they want to do it, they want to do it.
mm-hmm.
But let's be really clear. Nobody is doing the analysis that they need to do to qualify the investment. So in the stack of agreements that they give you, they say you're a qualified investor and you understand the risk, and you may have an asset that's worth nothing later. So if you wanted to do it the right way, some of these companies have multiple holdcos. There might be 5 holdcos in the deal. So you would have to hire a Deloitte or a large CPA firm. It would probably take them 6 months to do a financial analysis to determine what the share value should be or unit value should be. And that's just not happening. And so people are taking it on faith that their people that they're working with are honest. They're taking it on faith that it's all going to work out. And I think some people are taking it on faith because they think size matters. But we see large companies every day in this country filing bankruptcy. So it doesn't, Jason said this earlier, when they recap, they're pulling money out and the money is going to the doctors and it's going to the company, but they're losing a little bit of control. And the more that happens, then we start seeing what we see in the marketplace where there's companies that just get to a point where they can't be sold anymore or they can't raise any revenue anymore. And if they're not earning and they're not able to replace that money with a recap, then their share value goes down. And eventually they file bankruptcy. So it's a complex situation. And I can tell you right now, I'm working on more than one DSO and my clients are happy. They want to do it. And then my job as a lawyer is to review the 12 or 15 documents, put the puzzle together and try to explain to my clients what it is that they're getting. And you raised the issue earlier. There's no guarantee they're going to get the remainder of the money. And there are some reasons why they could not get it. If they get terminated for cause or they quit, the employment agreement, if it fails or gets breached, they're not going to get any money because that'll cause a breach in the operating agreement, the LLC agreement, and they'll lose their money. So,
yeah, and I guess I want to be clear that I do this all the time. I'm very intimately familiar. I'm none of the DSO's preferred attorneys. In fact, you won't see me on a single list of any of the DSOs, and I take pride in that. But I also do a ton of DSO deals. So my point in all of this is I need you to be educated. I need you to be working with people that are going to tell you everything. They're not going to hold back from you because they're dependent upon the deal closing. I need you to be able to we want you to make informed decisions. So that's really at the end of the day what we care about. You're big boys, you're big girls, you can make your own decisions, but we want them to be informed and understand it's not a one level issue. It's a multiple level issue that takes time to go through. And so it's your biggest decision in your career. So I want you to make sure you're doing it correctly.
And understand that the DSO money is significant.
Yes.
And they have a lot of money that they have in marketing dollars, and they are going to send you direct mailers, make direct calls, invite you to seminars, invite you to dinner. And they're going to try to make you feel really good about yourself so that you want to be part of their club. And if you don't use an advisor group, a good consultant, a good attorney, and analyze the letter of intent or use a broker to try to get multiple bids.
Right.
So they only want you to go direct because they just want to bypass the broker. And then they say, oh, well, you're saving money because you're not paying a broker. Well, yeah, what's happening is you're selling for less and you're not getting assistance. It doesn't make sense. If your broker can go out and find 3 or 4 competitive bids, then you may get a lot more money and the value of your broker services will be easily earned. So yeah, be careful. I do a lot of transactions where there's no brokers involved on the DSO side. And if you're marketing just to one person, or if you're just dealing with one person, you may not be maximizing your value. And I have to say that the LOIs are so different from DSO to DSO to DSO. Mm-hmm. If you don't deal with somebody that has been doing this a long time, you just can't understand the outcome. You can see the numbers on the page, but you got to really dive into it and dissect it. And so if you have 5 different offer levers, we may not think the one with the highest dollar amount is the one you should choose.
Exactly.
I mean, there can be a lot of other reasons in that, letter of intent that are more important than just $8 million or $5 million. And so that's why I would say yeah, if I'm the DSO, that's what I want to do. I want to directly go to you and get you to be super excited that we chose you. And then you just don't talk to anybody, sign my letter of intent. And I'm going to tell you, no, I'm not making any changes to my documents. Don't have an attorney look at it. And if you do that, yeah, you'll complete your transaction. You won't know if you left money on the table. You won't know if you're legally exposed. You don't know if you made the right choice. But you'll have saved what, $25,000, $30,000, $40,000 in legal fees, or you may have saved hundreds of thousands of dollars in a brokerage fee, but you may have lost hundreds more, or in the legal space, tremendous amount more money by not protecting yourself on liability issues.
It reminds me of a deal that I was involved in last year. There was a DSO that was offering, basically telling this practice, big practice, doing over 15 million, single location. So it's obviously an albatross, unicorn, whatever you want to call it. But the DSO was offering $100 million for this $15 million location practice. And the seller, all they could see was the $100 million. They couldn't see anything else. Well, I represented the minority partner. And the minority partner was like, this just doesn't seem right. And so I was able to get my hands on the LOI, and I just started laughing. Because, yes, it was a $100 million offer. But guess how much of it was in actual cash? $4.5 million.
Wow.
And then the rest was in equity, in notes, and then how they got to the 100 million was through a future recap, which they were valuing at 18. I can't remember if it was 18 or 18.5 times EBITDA.
Yeah.
And it's just like,
so it was a $4.5 million deal.
exactly.
Yeah.
For a practice doing 15 million.
Yeah.
Which could get, a much higher cash out to begin with.
Even with a private buyer.
Even with a private buyer. And I was just laughing, and my client ended up not doing the deal. We actually negotiated a successful exit, and that client then wound up buying another practice and took a practice in a very short time from $500,000. He's now almost doing $3 million in less than a year. So the point is, don't get caught up in numbers that may or may not be true, may not be real.
Yeah, I think the other, and you just brought it up, since we're talking about DSOs, you very rarely get all cash, right? So then there's a breakdown of equity that they're going to give you, some of them maybe not. They're going to hold back some money for indemnity for future problems over an 18-month period. And then there's going to be a JV portion that you're going to retain some percentage, 30 to 40%, which you're hopefully to recap some. Some companies you can sell, some companies you can't. And then there may be some companies that are going to pay you on a promissory note. And there's going to be some companies that pay you on a production or a collection basis, or they might pay you based on an EBITDA basis. So these are some of the other red flags that come up. So what we find is that the senior lender, the people that are giving the money to the DSOs, are writing documents that are very, very onerous. And so a lot of the notes that we're seeing are what they call subordinated promissory notes, which means that if the senior lender thinks that the DSO can't pay their bills, the DSO doesn't have to pay you on your promissory note. So, if you're holding $1 million note with a company that you think is super solvent, and you're going to collect them that $1 million for the next 5 years, and that's part of your retirement, and the senior lender comes in and does an analysis, external, as you mentioned, not an internal valuation, and they determine that the cash flow is not what it should be, then suddenly your promissory note stops paying.
Right.
And you have to wait until that company becomes solvent. And if that company can't recap, there is no magic fix for it to become solvent. So that secured promissory note model is really difficult. The other thing I mentioned was production-based, collection-based models for payouts when they tie it to EBITDA. So again, EBITDA is earnings before interest, taxes, and depreciation. And the people who control EBITDA are the companies. And the operating expenses that they have are different than what you have. So your EBITDA is not going to be what their EBITDA is. And you find that out when they're calculating EBITDA when they're going to buy you, there's minuses and additions for their operational issues. But you can't control post-closing your success level on an EBITDA basis. And so if you have a $500,000, or if you have 3 or 4 different payout periods and you have to hit certain EBITDA thresholds, that's going to pay you another $1 million in $250,000 increments, and they can manipulate EBITDA, and not that they're bad people, but just in their operational expenses, then you may never get your payout. That's the second issue that's tied to that. And then on the third issue, on the promissory note, what was I going to say? Well, why don't you pick up? Because there was something.
Well, as we're talking about this, understand that there are ways that we work to try to soften or protect or mitigate all of these issues in ways that may seem like they're not important, but are extremely important if something goes wrong. And so what we're trying to give you a bunch of the issues to know about, but these aren't like, oh, if it's in the deal, don't do the deal. It's how you deal with them, how you negotiate these issues. Because just because there is a note doesn't mean that we don't move forward with a deal. But we have to get as much information as possible. We have to have knowledge so that we can make informed decisions. I
was going to say the other real red flag for me is when the company who's buying you out wants you to guarantee personally the acquisition loan. So if they're doing a 60-40 split and the 40% acquisition loan for you is $1 million, they want you to personally guarantee it because that's what the senior lender wants. That creates $1 million liability for you with a company that you haven't vetted, that you haven't seen a fairness study, that you haven't dropped into their financial Dropbox and looked at their financials. You've had no CPA look at it. And now not only are you transferring your goodwill value that you've earned over your 30 or 40-year career for unit value or share value that you have no idea whether it's right or not, then you're now guaranteeing the debt with that company. And if that company fails, you're giving up $1 million.
And you need to understand, well, it's not just $1 million.
Whatever it is.
Because and what Lee's saying is you're personally guaranteeing the loan. And I've worked, for the record, I will never allow any of my clients to sell to, there's a few of these DSOs out there that require you to sign this personal guarantee. I will fire you as a client if that is something that you want to do because I can't protect you. And I only have so much time and I don't want to waste my time on people who want to do that. So anyways.
Well, I'm not even on their list. They won't refer to me.
Not me either. But the point is that the personal guarantee, when you try to get it modified so that it is only associated with your 40% interest, they say no, they won't cap it. So what that means is if this company goes down, yes, you're guaranteeing the $1 million, but what you really don't understand is you're not just guaranteeing the $1 million. There's no cap associated. You're capped at what the total value of that particular practice is. So if it's a $5 million loan and suddenly the company's gone, you don't have a cap at $1 million. And that's what we've been trying to get in the past, is to cap it at certain percentages or cap it at the practice value or anything else. So what it ends up becoming is for lack of a better term, an uncapped personal guarantee associated with the loan that they are taking out on your practice to buy your practice to give you money. So I need you to think about that, let that sink in, because the DSOs that use this personal guarantee have some of the biggest influencer sycophants within dentistry. They pay these people a lot of money to convince you to go with their companies. They've inundated the education sphere. They have some pretty big names that push these DSOs, and then all of a sudden you don't even realize what you're signing, and now you just signed a personal guarantee, which means that if they go under, your entire family goes under. Your everything except for your house is now gone. So that's what I need you to think about on these things.
Well, it's kind of doom and gloom.
A little bit, yeah. Oh, but no, don't worry. They're not going to default. It's okay. It's guaranteed money. So
It's guaranteed money.
guaranteed, baby.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've talked a lot about seller issues. What are some other what are some things that sellers just don't think about that can maybe either net them more money or net them? I don't know. What are some things that can help them in terms of dollar figures or maybe freedom or anything like that?
Well, I think we mentioned one of them already.
Yeah.
They can stop running personal expenses through their bank account so they can maximize their number. They can hire good advisors to get through the smoke and mirrors to realize the true value of the deal. Because if I told you that you weren't going to get the 40%, and if I told you you're going to have to guarantee $1 million or $4 million, and the cash value you get is about 50% of the value of your practice, I don't think anybody would stand in that line and buy a ticket, right? So I think that they have to stop and analyze it and see if it makes sense. So, but if you're going to sell your practice, the things that you need to do, like I said, is stop running a lot of personal expenses. And I really tell people to start 10 years ahead of time. So 10 years ahead of time, take a look at the technology, take a look at the physical plant, take a look at the condition of the operation, make a cogent business decision as to whether I should be investing in my physical plant and my technology or pushing it off. But when you get to 5 years, it's too late. So you don't want to go in and spend $300,000 on a rehab in the office or buy $200,000 of technology if you're only going to be there 12, 14, 18 months afterwards.
Right.
You're not going to get the money out. And Michael knows this. When we hear this all the time, the doctors will say, well, what happens if I buy this piece of equipment? Or what happens if I do, improvements? And we just say the numbers are the numbers. And quite often it makes it worse if they're carrying debt load on it because it drives the net down.
Right.
So actually doing those things could be worse for you. But if you're 10 years out, 5, I really look at it pretty hard. But 7, 8, I could be okay with it. But yeah, 10 years, you should be looking at it. And in today's world, there's so many cool things that you can have in your office, and spend some time with the salespeople and have them explain it to you in a meaningful way how it's going to be beneficial for you, not only on a clinical basis, but on an economic basis, because they've quantified it. Like they know if you buy a CERAC or something like that, you're going to drop your, and I think you may have used the word 10% earlier, or 8% on lab, you might drop it down to a 4 or 5 or 3%. So there may be a way to bring it in and make you feel good about your practice, make your staff feel good, make your patients feel like you're at the tip of the spear, you're the best of the best, and make it economically, beneficial for you. But if you wait till the very last minute, it doesn't make a lot of sense to start changing off the avocado linoleum on your front desk for marble. It's not going to make a difference. So
Michael, what are some of the things that buyers are looking for? What makes a practice more attractive to some of these younger buyers?
Well, they want that technology. They want that cone beam, that CBCT. They want new x-rays. They want paperless office. They want the shiny penny, right? They don't want to have to come in and spend a bunch of money. When they're in dental school, they're using all state-of-the-art technologies. And when they come in and see an old practice, I think they might get a little freaked out. But they need to understand it's also an opportunity for them to come in and build upon something that has room to grow instead of buying something that's maybe maxed out and then they can't keep
to
up.
Lee's point, it's important. They want the shiny new toys and everything. But to Lee's point, if you wait till the last minute as a seller, you probably still shouldn't buy it because buyers they might want to put their own spin on the practice.
Yeah, and then
anyway.
they'll find something why they think they should have a discount. And then the seller's like, well, I just bought this new cone beam. you know? And then, there's a little bit of,
yeah, if you have a practice doing $1 million and you spend $400,000 remodeling and putting in some new technology, and your overhead was great. Let's say your overhead was, you're making 60% profit margins. The practice is worth exactly the same.
Yeah.
We're not going to give you a equipment surcharge valuation pricing. And even if we did, the lender's not going to fund it.
Well, let me play devil's advocate. So, to Michael's point, buyers are looking for shiny, pretty, efficient, practices that look nice. So, would it be something that could I say that it might not have an impact on the valuation of the practice, but it may have an indirect value because more buyers will want to acquire, and could either A, drive up prices, or B, sell the practice quicker?
It's all money. It's
Yeah.
all money. So, I mean, if you're selling your practice for $800 and the buyer wants $200,000 of equipment and they try to negotiate to $600,000, or if you spend the $200,000 before you put it on the market, it's all money.
Right.
So when I lectured at the ADA, I had to give presentations on what sellers would like when they sell their practices and what buyers would like when they sell from their practice sale. And I had one slide for the buyers. They want everything, right? Like Michael said, they want the seller to have the best technology. They want the shiny penny. They want the seller to stay and work back, and we can have a conversation about that, or just be there. But they want that all at the expense of the seller, and I don't think that the seller should be shouldering that expense. So what my experience is the practices are fine.
Mm-hmm.
People are coming in. Doesn't matter how bad the artwork is. Doesn't matter how stained the floor is. Doesn't matter how cramped the operatories are. If they're doing $1.5 million, they're doing it $1.5 million. And the patients are comfortable. And now you take that practice and make it really pretty. Marble it out. Shine it all up. Now the patients think they're paying for it.
Exactly.
So, I mean, there's a fine line between the two. And I'm not saying you shouldn't have a really nice looking office. We see some really nice looking office. Oddly enough, we sell some offices where we are shocked. We walk in and go, oh my God, can we sell this? And we'll sell that like in a week.
Mm.
And it's for example, we have an endo practice right now. And I walked in, I immediately said to the seller, this is really nice. I'm in a lot of offices. I really like this. And I'm an endodontist. I went around and looked at everything they had. I looked at the microscopes. I go, I love these microscopes. They're the best on the market. They're a little bit older. And our buyer came in and said, oh, I got to get rid of all the microscopes. I got to update everything in here. So I want this huge price reduction.
Oh, wow.
And so, should the seller have done that before? No, because he could have never guessed what the person would want because the practice was already really nice. And if they want a discount later, you can say yes or no, but there's no point doing it up front last minute. If you're going to do it for yourself and do it because you think it's going to make you happy, make your patients happy, make your staff happy. And if you're there long enough to realize that value, do it. I mean, and if you can afford it and it makes you happy, do it. But I'll tell you this, I've been in a lot of offices. There's a lot of stuff on the shelves that never gets used. And doctors buy things at the conventions and the latest gadget, and it's just sitting there.
But it's a Section 179 deduction.
It's a 179 deduction. Yeah, I can write it off. But that's
words in English.
So I think that it can make sense to update it, and for a lot of people, it's so cathartic to do it. It's really healthy for them. But then, like I said, we have a lot of people that are so frustrated that they spent $400,000 and they're not getting any more money, and they're so mad at us. Like, why don't you see it? Why don't you understand it? And the fact of the matter is, the banks have a formula. I didn't make the formula. And you know the formula, debt coverage ratio formula.
Right.
So it's seller's discretionary earnings divided by the buyer's liabilities times 100. And for most banks, if it's $1.2 of profit for $1 of liability, they're going to fund the deal.
All day.
So where do I plug in the $400,000 shiny new, practice? They don't care. If the net's not there, they're not doing it. If the buyer has high liability, they're not doing it. I mean, a high number of liabilities, they're not doing it. So it's a good question. Now, the better question is, should we bring in other procedures, right? So can we do things to enhance the practice without spending a lot of money? And the answer, yeah, there's things you can do within the boundaries of ethics, right? I mean, so you can go get orthodontically trained and do Invisalign. Maybe you start doing some of the specialty work you're sending out. Maybe there's some fee equilibration, where you can figure out what your fees are and comparative with the other doctors in the community. And maybe you don't change your crown fee to the highest level, but maybe you're changing your single X-ray film or fee, or your exam fee, and maybe those little bumps will add $200,000 or $300,000 over a 5-10 year period. So there may be some other ways to raise the value that last 5-10 years of your practice. The main one, of course, is not running the expenses through, because that's going to help the multiple. But yeah, do a fee equilibration. I know Henry Schein used to have something where they could put a thumb drive in your computer, run a report, and they could tell you where you were at in the community on the fees, if you're high or low. So I don't know if they still do that. But like I said, picking up some services that you're not maybe using laser, maybe using Arrestin. I'm an endodontist, so I know nothing about cosmetic dentistry. Maybe doing some cosmetic dentistry. So there's other ways to increase the value. And like you said, we talked about earlier, you have 4 chairs. You're not working the 5th day. Work the 5th day.
Mm-hmm.
But after working 35 years, nobody wants to punch that extra day on the clock and go in and work. So, but that would be better than painting carpet and spending hundreds of thousands of dollars on equipment.
If you have any other questions, feel free to click the link below, and hopefully we can assist you in that process.